And now we get to talk about one of my favourite shows of all time. That's right, it's The Venture Bros, an animated comedy that kinda transcends the bounds of that terminology in regards to the style and the voice acting and the writing and the narratives that it weaves. It's like one of my other favourite shows, Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law, but turned up to 11 in regards to the complexity it was willing to go with the characters and sheer madness they got involved in.
Oh, I swear you... Oh, my pants are on fire! Dean, my pants are on fire!
Regardless, I'm not here to convince you to go and watch this show about the lives and misadventures of the mad scientist Dr. Thaddeus Venture, his two sons Hank and Dean, and their bodyguard Brock Sampson, all of which often involve the arch nemesis of Dr. Thaddeus, the Monarch, and his team of Henchman 21, Henchman 24, and Dr. Girlfriend, or as she is known later on, Dr. Mrs. the Monarch.
Pay attention, Monarch! That last one almost took my head off!
Sorry!
Those aren't even close to a tenth of the wacky characters featured in this show, and seriously, just go and watch it. It's really, really good, and you will not be upset that you did. But anyway, today we are here to talk about one thing, and one thing only. The thing that has been repeatedly getting requests in my comments. That of the trans representation that exists within the Venture Bros. Now, to immediately alleviate the concerns of those who don't like not knowing whether this is going to be a canon thing, or an allegory thing, or a related thing, it's kinda one and a half of those. There is an allegory point in here somewhere. There's also a somewhat canon character who is also sort of in the related camp. Okay, yeah, that wasn't helpful at all for explaining what we're gonna do, is it? One of them's a gender swap that sort of has a lot more definitive trans identity in it than the other gender swaps that we have covered, okay? That's kind of the vibe. Jesus Christ, let's just get into it with our first character, that of Hunter Gavers, or Colonel Gavers, or General Gavers, or Agent Kelly Clarkson, depending on the day.
Are you still ready for anything? Yeah. Lesson number one, trust no one.
Now, who is this Hunter Gavers? Well, Hunter is a member and leader of the OSI, the big government spy agency thing at the start of the show that Brock Sampson was a part of during his early years, and Hunter was the person who Brock learned much of his current toolset from, something that we see across various flashbacks with them discussing things together. A key part of those flashbacks is also the fact that during many of the missions where the two are going undercover for something, Hunter Gavers consistently and persistently goes undercover as a woman, something which does not seem to be necessarily essential for the purposes of the mission at hand, but which they do regardless of that fact.
Why, if we don't keep our eyes on our neighbor's paper, the baddies get the bomb and the whole world goes kablooey.
It is also during this OSI stuff that we get our first hinting towards a grander concept around Hunter Gavers. Specifically during this conversation here with a younger Billy Quizboy, wherein Hunter makes it very apparently clear to us that they wish they could be born with big beautiful tits, as an example of how life doesn't always treat you fairly.
And I want to be born with big, beautiful tits! Make some lemonade with this, will you?
Now, none of this is immediately transgender. I mean, that last part is definitely hinting towards some kind of gender dysphoria from Hunter in regards to how they perceive their own body and what they wished it actually looked like. But the stuff about dressing up as a woman during operations could be just part of the fact that it's something people would not be looking for. That Hunter is a more effective agent thanks to the fact that they are willing to gender swap and mix things up. And all of that certainly sounds like a very plausible and convincing excuse to do it, right? A perfectly plausible series of words that allow one to engage in a level of cross-dressing that is normally frowned upon, and that maybe brings the person involved a level of comfort and joy, despite the fact that it is only a temporary facade and not something they are 100% committing to. In this regards though, specifically the cross-dressing regards, and definitely not the whole expressed desire to be born with a feminine body, we see a big part of the inspiration for Hunter-Gatherers, which is ex-FBI director J. Edgar Hoover, with one of the big rumours about Hoover being the fact that he would host all-male parties in which he would cross-dress, and that he had women's clothing in his desk at the FBI. Now, this is a debatable historical fact. The whole idea of a transvestite nature to J. Edgar Hoover comes from a single source, specifically Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover by Anthony Summers, where he quotes Susan Rosensteel, a wife of a friend of Hoover's, a not so reliable source because she had pled guilty to attempted perjury earlier on, and frankly it kind of showcases more than anything the way that accusing someone of doing something that at the time would be considered perverse sexual deviancy, and well, actually frankly still does get considered that in many circles, is more damaging than all the very real stuff that person did. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was a terrible, terrible person who engaged in massive amounts of American political scandals, helped organized crime proliferate in the USA, and was instrumental in crackdowns on gay people and intellectuals thanks to participating in both the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare. Oh, who could forget all the blackmail pornography? Or COINTELPRO? Or targeting civil rights leaders like MLK Jr. and Malcolm X? Regardless, the base portrayal that we have of Hunter-Gatherers leans into this mythologized gossip about Hoover, and then builds a different character from it. Though both are shown to have a very similar perspective on governmental spy agencies.
Carry on, good and evil Superman. You work for the government. The United States have shut your third damn eye for a f***ing reason.
And the fact that what they do is beyond good and evil. No, not the game, you dinguses, the concept. This further develops though later on, when we find out that Hunter-Gatherers has gone rogue, leaving the OSI after stealing $40 million and kidnapping a plastic surgeon to get a sex reassignment surgery. Something we discover as Brock Sampson is hired by the OSI to hunt her down and kill her, only for Brock to be unable to do it, partly because Hunter was effectively a father figure to him and a mentor, and also because one of the key things that Hunter-Gatherers taught Brock during that mentoring period was that they don't kill women and children. That is what separates them from the bad guys.
No women, no children. Them's the rules. Separates us from the bad.
It's interesting because there is almost a kind of confirmation in that fact that Brock Sampson does see Hunter-Gatherers as a woman after this SRS. Like, Brock is unable to kill her now because she is a woman, which is a sort of nice commentary on the fact that I guess Brock isn't transphobic and does view trans women as women, while also still being couched in that deniability that we mentioned earlier. Like, Hunter-Gatherers only got a sex change because it would make her more protected from these OSI agents like Brock Sampson, not because of any deep-seated desire that she might have expressed at some point and will continue expressing down the line, right? We then get a series of plot stuff where we see Hunter-Gatherers working as a stripper while Brock goes to them for information multiple different times, her working as a stripper for, I guess, reasons that are out of personal desire. Like, she has all that damn money, she doesn't need to be at a strip club, and yet Hunter does it anyways.
You take this hot wad of cash and do what you gotta do. Don't you dare ask me what I did to get those $100 bills.
I also like the fact that Hunter is a gender-neutral name, now that I've said it like a bunch of times. Kinda nice that it doesn't even need to change to work for whatever pronouns we might be using this time for the character. However, all of these meetings turn out to be part of a grander plan from Hunter-Gatherers, who is working with Molotov cocktease to form a new all-female assassin group, since Brock has successfully killed a bunch of other assassins and mercenaries that stood in their way. The Black Hearts, as they call themselves, being in a great position because all the competition is fucking dead.
What are you gonna do, little man? Woman? I know you know how to stab me in the back.
We also have another little supportive moment here. The fact that Hunter-Gatherers is able to be on an all-female assassin team without any difficulty. Like all these other women see her as a woman in a way that doesn't cause any dissonance for the group's formation. Weirdly supportive stuff in the background all around. And at this point, I also do want to mention the visual aspect. Yes, despite the fact that she used that plastic surgeon to give herself a pair of big beautiful tits, as she might call them, and also a generally rockin' bod, Hunter-Gathers retains the exact same face model that was used for her pre-transition, making her very clearly identifiable in what is a mixture of comedic reasons. Like, it's funny that she is this grand undercover agent, but who never changes her face at all to suit whatever role she might be playing. But there's also the probably transphobic comedy of having people laugh at the fact that her body is feminine and her face is what would be typically perceived as masculine. Something that probably speaks to one of the major audiences for this Adult Swim series, teenage boys and young men. A group of people who, as far as marketing is concerned, enjoy mocking minorities, especially at this time period. Surprise, surprise twist though, it turns out that Hunter-Gathers was actually just doing this whole Black Hearts thing and the sex change thing so she could get out of the OSI, which was becoming corrupt and filled with villains, and reform Sphinx, a different, older spy agency.
Well, you don't know dick.
So yeah, she detransitioned for this, though a key scene later on when discussing the fact that men who live and work together should have no secrets, she blatantly says this very well known and repeated line.
That there are no secrets. I miss my breasts. Inside of me there is a woman screaming to be heard.
Now, this is basically the end of the trans Hunter-Gathers arc. It doesn't really get brought up much more after this, and they kind of remain a background character for the rest of the show. But I do have to stop everything here and have a bit of a moment about all of what just occurred. See, a lot of people might jump on that end bit as an example of the kind of thing that I've been mentioning throughout the commentary so far. That plausible deniability that allows one to go, well, they aren't trans. The whole thing is just a ploy being used to achieve a goal. It's more like your general gender swaps, wherein a cisgender character will swap genders out of a desire to obtain something, or because the universe requires them to learn some sort of lesson. They're not trans. It's the kind of thing that puts something much more heavily into the trans allegory or metaphor camp than the actual trans camp, wherein the community has to do the heavy lifting of headcanon and feeling a connection to a character that is not explicitly one of us. However, Hunter-Gathers isn't really similar to that situation at all, because of that second part of the end bit that I put in there.
Inside of me there is a woman screaming to be heard.
The fact that Hunter-Gathers clearly states as one of the things that they would consider to be a secret that they miss their feminine body, and that inside them there is a woman screaming to be let out. A meme statement that reflects a very transgender woman narrative, which buys into a consistent and persistent, those important words again, identity, which is that Hunter-Gathers would like to be a woman. That they see their ideal self as a woman, and that thanks to a series of external factors, probably around the spy world and its masculine dominance, if I had to take a stab in the dark guess here, they do not feel able to live fully in that regards, only being able to do it while on missions or as part of a scheme. This also brings me to another thing that I want to discuss. The importance of respect in detransitioning, and how we also need to consider the idea of detransitioning beyond the narratives that get spun around it from anti-trans organizations or right-wing groups. See, detransitioning is something that does happen. It's not super frequent, but it occurs enough that there are people who deal with it. Now, a common thought from that is that the only reason to detransition is because the person isn't actually transgender, and that the social/medical transitioning they went through didn't solve the dysphoria, and therefore it came from other reasons. That's the line that a lot of people take when they're trying to use the existence of detransitioners to ban trans healthcare, or remove trans support networks.
But their impact is inarguably outsized. current bills could limit healthcare for up to 300,000 trans kids nationally.
I mean, obviously, just statistically, that's a bad logical argument. Like, we shouldn't remove all trans stuff because a small subset of people who transition do so incorrectly. That just seems to be ignoring the majority of people for which it works. The clearer answer there would be to provide better service that attempts to ensure that each trans person or person who thinks they are trans gets the care that they need, rather than remove the service entirely. But the point I want to get to here is that there are a host of reasons for why people detransition. It's not all just because the person wasn't trans. In fact, surveys have found a variety of justifications, from people feeling unsafe in the environment they transitioned into, issues of bigotry from family, friends, society, monetary concerns around it, health concerns that are not specific to being trans, such as the impact of surgeries or HRT on a body that might not be suited for them, finding that perhaps the original transitioning didn't really fully reflect their gender identity, that last one being pretty important because so often transitioning gets treated as a one-size-fits-all concept, when in reality someone's gender identity can be vastly complex and different to another's. In many of these detransitioning surveys too, a commonly forgotten factor is whether the person involved retransitioned at some point, or is intending to do so. This is all important to remember, and plays a big part in how we see hunter-gatherers from Venture Bros here, because the most inaccurate thing we can do is look at the fact that they detransitioned as a sign that they are not transgender, and that they're just a cis man. Doing so ignores clear information that has been handed to us, and treats gender identity as either you are cisgender and haven't transitioned, or you are transgender and have transitioned/stayed transitioned, which isn't a helpful way of viewing the process, and actually denies a whole host of trans people that exist outside of those lines. There are many trans people who haven't transitioned, or won't transition in a physical sense, due to a variety of factors, but still have the elements by which we denote trans people. To deny them their part in our community is a disrespect, and a disservice that plays into binary norms and cisgender normativity, both of which are poisonous concepts that erode the people who exist in the margins of our group. I know this has taken up a fair bit of time, and might come off a bit ranty or wanky, but it is important to take note of, especially because of how much I have seen hunter-gatherers and their trans connection dismissed thanks to that whole detransitioning. Sure, Hunter might have transitioned for reasons outside of trying to alleviate gender dysphoria, in the same way that they gender swap and dress up in feminine clothing out of reasons that are not tied to how they identify. But there is clearly some deep-seated feelings that make all of that seem to be excuses for doing so in an environment that Hunter maybe does not feel comfortable fully committing to transitioning in. Anyways, we're now moving on to a very different character, and a very different trans perspective, with Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, a character who I want to make absolutely patently clear is not transgender. There is no single moment or piece of information that canonizes such an event, and she is just a cisgender woman who smoked a lot of cigarettes and has a deep masculine voice because of that.
What? When did you start smoking?
1989-ish?
Her 3-pack-a-day voice?
However, the fact that she isn't canonically trans does not stop her from being a trans allegory in some ways, nor does it stop her from being a character to which trans people can find some connection because of a shared struggle. A shared struggle that does ultimately boil down to her voice. Now, a fun little tidbit I will share here before we get into it is the fact that her appearance and how she sounds was based off of First Lady Jackie Kennedy, who was described as having a smooth, semi-masculine voice by people back in the day. It doesn't hold much weight beyond that, but it is interesting to note how there is such a diversity in women's voices that there are quite a few who do sound more what we would think of as masculine-esque. You know, It's another one of those classic cases of how silly it is to act as if gender and its identifiers are perfectly binary split. There is no crossover and overlap in what we perceive as male and female traits. Like, there are for sure generalities and norms, but those get broken all the time by individuals, so why make it a big deal that people have to fit into those stupid-ass prescribed boundaries? Back to the character. And with Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, we see a woman who has dealt with people taking issue with her voice. The most interesting example for me of this being this scene from a woman's bathroom that I think speaks to a fascinating experience.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, I belong in here. I just have a deep voice.
Okay, can I ask you another one?
I mean, it might not seem like much, but her response here speaks volumes about her life. The fact that because of how she sounds, she often gets questioned by people on whether she belongs in a female location. That she has become so accustomed to that occurring that she just sounds bored about what is a rather horrible thing to bring up to someone. Her voice, an element of her that others have made comments on and made a big deal about, is something that she is used to dealing with, and she doesn't let it impact or restrict her life. Dr. Mrs. the Monarch is one of the smartest and most competent people on the show. She is the best villain, which becomes only more apparent as time goes on, and at no point is her femininity denied to her, nor is it impinged by the fact that she sounds like what we would expect a man to sound like.
You'd never hit a girl. I could do this, and you wouldn't think.
I mean, she's also voiced by a guy, because they wanted to make her really sound like a dude. Part of that thing we talked about with Adult Swim and its target audiences, / what they're looking to make comedy of. But I think that its representation is allowed to transcend those original, potentially horrible comedy bounds. She is a capable and portrayed as sexually attractive woman, who knows that about herself, and the people she has in her life do not care about the voice in a way that matters. I mean, she has many partners, and a husband who actually enjoys her voice, who find it attractive because it's hers.
We swing! I watched my wife suck Manta Claus dry and then make him breakfast.
Is that true? Eggs and buttered toast.
I think there's something sweet about that, and it ties into all that stuff I've just talked about, because it's about dismantling the shape that we have in our minds for how people should look and act and talk because of their gender/sex. It challenges that stereotyping, and that challenging is only beneficial towards the cause of many different groups that have suffered under the cisgender straight patriarchy that constructed it. I know, I said the words, but look, that term exists for a reason. It's an essential part of any discussion on gender and sexuality and presentation. Just because it's also a meme doesn't take away from that, and if you got upset as a cis straight man by me saying that, maybe just consider why you got upset. And I think that any trans person who looks at Dr. Mrs. the Monarch and feels some level of comfort from the fact that her deep voice doesn't stop her from being a woman, doesn't make her feel bad about herself, well, I think that matters in much the same way that any deep-voiced cis woman feeling good about that part of herself does. Trans people also need those reassurances as much as any group of people that the parts of yourself that you can't or don't want to change are not something that will ruin your life. And that in fact it doesn't and shouldn't really matter in the larger zoomed out sense. People should get to feel attractive as whomever they are, and not feel like they have to change that into something they don't care about, just to meet the expectations of others. And in those regards, Dr. Mrs. the Monarch is an iconic example of someone not caring and succeeding.
Do not follow me. Just stay here and do whatever. Okay.
Those are the trans-esque conversation points that I want to discuss here from the Venture Bros. And I want to make it clear that much of this is not necessarily a thumbs up for the creators of the show. They never really went out of their way to put in explicit good representation. It was just a case that making jokes in certain ways and doing comedic characters in a specific manner ended up crafting these characters that we in the community can look at and find some level of connection with. I mean, that is what so much of transgender representation in places boils down to. It's all smoke and mirrors and people putting in a lot of effort to find the bits that speak to them and explaining how and why that has meaning, rather than any real special engagement from the creative side. Frankly, as much as I would prefer definitive trans representation from writers, directors, animators, or whatever, I also don't want to lose that community involvement and investment. A big part of half my videos on this channel being all about shows that were not doing a trans thing, but that trans people took and critically tried to analyze them in a way that would let them be allegorical. And it's because I love that effort. And I love the way that it allows for people to come together and discuss these characters that others are trying to make into a trans metaphor or a trans headcanon. It's a big part of our history, and it's also a great way to form bonds over it. And so I kind of want us to do a 50-50 sort of thing in the future. Like, yeah, let's have actual trans characters, based on trans people and with trans people involved in their creation, that allows people to definitely see themselves reflected. That can be really helpful for those coming out of the closet for the first time or exploring their identity initially. But let's also do characters that straddle the line in a way that lets us who've already gone over those hurdles and reached some level of trans resting point go digging for something that might speak to our prior experiences, or might be trans-like if you tilt your head a certain way. Anyways, my conclusion is getting a bit weird here, weird like the Venture Bros, so let's call that a bit of on-point branding for the topic and move on to saying that if you like what I did here, or like what I said, or enjoyed my role as background noise while you... seeing a screen, a primary monitor on which a game is playing. Could it be... Elden Ring? God, I thought that was too hard for anyone to play, but good luck with it. If you did enjoy what I do here, then please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, or checking out some of my older videos that will be on the sidebar over there. It's all really helpful for letting YouTube know that it should recommend me in the algorithm, especially that bit about clicking from this video onto other videos I've made. If you really, really like what I have done here and want to support it, the best way to do that is by going to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi and subscribing there. Those in the $5 and up category should be on the screen right now. And I'm really grateful to everyone who does, because it allows me to work on this channel the way that I have been doing. Especially recently with the move from doing a video every week to doing a video once every a couple of weeks-ish. A move which was designed to let me work on the big, massive, brief look videos more thoroughly. Since the change, I've already been able to smash through the Riverdale video to around the end of Season 2, coming in at like 35,000 words, which translates to about 4 hours or so of speaking time, which does mean, if you do the maths, the entire thing is going to be like 16 hours long. Trust me, the show needs that kind of length. It's a fucking nightmare mess of so much plot happening so fast all the time. But yeah, if you like those videos and like these videos, then helping to pay for my rent, food, cat, internet, power, all of it, goes a long way to letting me do this rather than having to find a job instead during these incredibly shit times in New Zealand. If just 1% of the people who regularly watch my videos and are subscribed to my channel signed up at the $5 level, that would immediately put me at a point of not having to care about YouTube ad revenue or sponsorships to get by. So please consider doing so if you have the ability to. Anyways, huge thanks once more to everyone signed up to the Patreon. You lot are the real heroes who keep the channel going. And thanks to you for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day.